Chapter 29 of The Pathfinder. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Pathfinder by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 29. Playful she turned that he might see the passing smile her cheek put on, but when she marked how mournfully his eyes met hers, that smile was gone. Attributed to Lalla Rookh. The occurrences of the last few days had been too exciting, and had made too many demands on the fortitude of our heroine to leave her in the helplessness of grief. She mourned for her father, and she occasionally shuddered as she recalled the sudden death of Jenny, and all the horrible scenes she had witnessed. But on the whole she had aroused herself, and was no longer in the deep depression which usually accompanies grief. Perhaps the overwhelming, almost stupefying sorrow that crushed poor June, and left her for nearly 24 hours in a state of stupor, assisted Mabel in conquering her own feelings, for she had felt called on to administer consolation to the young Indian woman. This she had done in the quiet, soothing, insinuating way in which her sex usually exerts its influence on such occasions. The morning of the third day was set for that on which the Scud was to sail. Jasper had made all his preparations, the different effects were embarked, and Mabel had taken leave of June, a painful and affectionate parting. In a word, all was ready, and every soul had left the island but the Indian woman, Pathfinder, Jasper, and our heroine. The former had gone into a thicket to weep, and the three last were approaching the spot where 3 canoes lay, one of which was the property of June, and the other 2 were in waiting to carry the others off to the Scud. Pathfinder led the way, but when he drew near the shore, instead of taking the direction to the boats, he motioned to his companions to follow, and proceeded to a fallen tree which lay on the margin of the glade and out of view of those in the cutter. Seating himself on the trunk, he signed to Mabel to take her place on one side of him, and to Jasper to occupy the other. "Sit down here, Mabel; sit down there, Eau douce," he commenced, as soon as he had taken his own seat. "I've something that lies heavy on my mind, and now is the time to take it off, if it's ever to be done. Sit down, Mabel, and let me lighten my heart, if not my conscience, while I've the strength to do it." The pause that succeeded lasted 2 or 3 minutes, and both the young people wondered what was to come next. The idea that Pathfinder could have any weight on his conscience seemed equally improbable to each. "Mabel," our hero at length resumed, "we must talk plainly to each other afore we join your uncle in the cutter, where the Saltwater has slept every night since the last rally, for he says it's the only place in which a man can be sure of keeping the hair on his head, he does. Ah's me! What have I to do with these follies and sayings now? I try to be pleasant, and to feel light-hearted, but the power of man can't make water run up-stream. Mabel, you know that the Sergeant, afore he left us, had settled it atween us two that we were to become man and wife, and that we were to live together and to love one another as long as the Lord was pleased to keep us both on earth, yes, and afterwards too?" Mabel's cheeks had regained a little of their ancient bloom in the fresh air of the morning, but at this unlooked-for address they blanched again, nearly to the pallid hue which grief had imprinted there. Still she looked kindly, though seriously, at Pathfinder, and even endeavored to force a smile. "Very true, my excellent friend," she answered. "This was my poor father's wish, and I feel certain that a whole life devoted to your welfare and comforts could scarcely repay you for all you have done for us." "I fear me, Mabel, that man and wife needs be bound together by a stronger tie than such feelings, I do. You have done nothing for me, or nothing of any account, and yet my very heart yearns toward you, it does, and therefore it seems likely that these feelings come from something besides saving scalps and guiding through woods." Mabel's cheek had begun to glow again, and though she struggled hard to smile, her voice trembled a little as she answered, "Had we not better postpone this conversation, Pathfinder?" she said. "We are not alone, and nothing is so unpleasant to a listener, they say, as family matters in which he feels no interest." "It's because we are not alone, Mabel, or rather because Jasper is with us, that I wish to talk of this matter. The Sergeant believed I might make a suitable companion for you, and though I had misgivings about it, yes, I had many misgivings, he finally persuaded me into the idea, and things came round atween us, as you know. But, when you promised your father to marry me, Mabel, and gave me your hand so modestly, but so prettily, there was one circumstance, as your uncle called it, that you didn't know, and I've thought it right to tell you what it is before matters are finally settled. I've often taken a poor deer for my dinner when good venison was not to be found, but it is natural not to take up with the worst when the best may be had." "You speak in a way, Pathfinder, that is difficult to be understood. If this conversation is really necessary, I trust you will be more plain." "Well, then, Mabel, I've been thinking it was quite likely, when you gave in to the Sergeant's wishes, that you did not know the nature of Jasper Western's feelings toward you." "Pathfinder!" And Mabel's cheek now paled to the livid hue of death, then it flushed to the tint of crimson, and her whole frame shuddered. Pathfinder, however, was too intent on his own object to notice this agitation, and Eau douce had hidden his face in his hands in time to shut out its view. "I've been talking with the lad, and on comparing his dreams with my dreams, his feelings with my feelings, and his wishes with my wishes, I fear we think too much alike concerning you for both of us to be very happy." "Pathfinder, you forget. You should remember that we are betrothed," said Mabel hastily, and in a voice so low that it required acute attention in the listeners to catch the syllables. Indeed, the last word was not quite intelligible to the guide, and he confessed his ignorance by the usual "Anan?" "You forget that we are to be married, and such allusions are improper as well as painful." "Everything is proper that is right, Mabel, and everything is right that leads to justice and fair dealing, though it is painful enough, as you say, as I find on trial I do. Now, Mabel, had you known that Eau douce thinks of you in this way, maybe you never would have consented to be married to one as old and as uncomely as I am." "Why this cruel trial, Pathfinder? To what can all this lead? Jasper Western thinks no such thing. He says nothing. He feels nothing." "Mabel!" burst from out the young man's lips, in a way to betray the uncontrollable nature of his emotions, though he uttered not another syllable. Mabel buried her face in both her hands, and the two sat like a pair of guilty beings, suddenly detected in the commission of some crime which involved the happiness of a common patron. At that instant, perhaps, Jasper himself was inclined to deny his passion, through an extreme unwillingness to grieve his friend, while Mabel, on whom this positive announcement of a fact that she had rather unconsciously hoped than believed, came so unexpectedly, felt her mind momentarily bewildered, and she scarcely knew whether to weep or to rejoice. Still she was the first to speak, since Eau douce could utter naught that would be disingenuous, or that would pain his friend. "Pathfinder," said she, "you talk wildly. Why mention this at all?" "Well, Mabel, if I talk wildly, I am half wild, you know, by nature, I fear, as well as by habit." As he said this, he endeavored to laugh in his usual noiseless way, but the effect produced a strange and discordant sound, and it appeared nearly to choke him. "Yes, I must be wild. I'll not attempt to deny it." "Dearest Pathfinder, my best, almost my only friend, you cannot, do not think I intended to say that," interrupted Mabel, almost breathless in her haste to relieve his mortification. "If courage, truth, nobleness of soul and conduct?